King's Cross, 1988. Before long, the Intercity 125 will be a thing of the past on this, the former Great Northern Main Line. Today, BR's ultimate goal is in sight, as electrification presses onward, and the 125s will make way for Class 91 electric locomotives. One price of progress has been the addition of these unsightly overhead gantries. For our journey to Newcastle, there will be no overhead gantries and very few diesels. Along the way, we will be reminded of some other long-gone facets of Britain's railways. It is the summer of 1963, and while in decline, steam still dominates the scene, with Peppercorn A1 Pacific Aboya about to depart with an express for the north. We move ahead of Aboya to Huntingdon North. Thundering through with a fitted freight is a rather work-stained 9F. With the passing of the years, much has changed, both in essence and in detail. This scene is dated by the child's tricycle and this water column. While racing south, this A3 typifies the era. Gresley's V2s were often known as the engines which won the war. This one, St. Peter's School, York, was one of only 8 locomotives in the class to bear a name. The 262's departure precedes our first sighting of A4 Miles Beaver. Excitement is created for some young enthusiasts a short way north at Abbots Ripton with the appearance of 60032 Gannet. Before leaving Abbots Ripton, we pause on the footbridge as a rather grimy A4 speeds south with an 11-coach express. Peterborough was a major junction where the Great Northern met the Great Eastern and Midland Railways. Severe speed restrictions on the main lines through the station provided an ideal vantage point for photographers. A1 Pacific Sea Eagle enters the stage. These views of the station interior precede our move to the platform end in time for Sea Eagle's characteristically slippery departure. Engine changes were regularly performed at Peterborough. Our next view shows 60040 Cameronian having been detached from her train. A short while later, sister A3, the White Knight, arrives with an express. This stopover allows us a chance to recall this class in typical final BR condition. Standard fittings included German Witt-type smoke deflectors and double chimney, not to mention liberal coatings of grime. The crowning highlight of any East Coast visit was an appearance by the even then world-famous A4 Mallard. This stop with an up express allows us to sprint to the far end of the station to watch her departure. Before long, Union of South Africa would work the very last return trip of an A4 from London to Newcastle. But we have a long way to go, and a few more A4s to see. Our journey continues from the place where much East Coast mainline history was made, the cab of the immortal Flying Scotsman. Grantham was once the scene of many engine changes, while other trains passed at high speed. The appearance of A3 Colombo has obviously delighted at least one spotter. Grantham Shed Yard and B1s abound. It is not hard to understand why, in the 1960s, locations like this held such a fascination for enthusiasts, access being gained by fair means or foul. A3 St Simon moves off Shed in preparation to take over a northbound express, which is our cue to continue our journey. We pause at Torworth as Silver Fox, the star of that classic film Elizabethan Express, races southwards. Our journey north continues with an arrival at Leeds, which was a major source of traffic for the Great Northern Main Line. It was still possible to see a variety of Pacifics, even as late as 1964. As Scottish Union moves off to the Shed, we are reminded that there was more to see than just the work of Gresley and Peppercorn. Although designed at Swindon, the BR Standard Class 3 260s were virtually all confined to the northeastern region. 77002 draws out empty coaching stock. Note that this B1 is providing assistance. Of the BR standards, Britannias never gained a good foothold on the East Coast main line. But here 70038 nears York with a rail tour in 1967. York still ranks as one of Britain's classic stations and has fascinated enthusiasts for many generations. From our rooftop viewpoint, we're able to watch this V2 departing for Scarborough. A4s found frequent employment on the vacuum-fitted Scotch goods, but their displacement by diesels led to more mundane freight work. A continuous procession of trains through York provided a wide variety of locomotive types. The sharply curved northern exit from York Station provided a stiff challenge to engine crews. Miles Beaver once again. Here setting out with an express from Bournemouth, hence the Southern Region stop. A visit to York Shed finds A1 Pacific Kenilworth and her crew preparing the engine for their next turn of duty. In spite of its relatively modern design, a locomotive of this size would still need around an hour of preparation by driver and fireman before moving off shed. The stretch of line north of here to Darlington has always had a fine reputation for speed. Working a very mixed train of LMS, LNER and BR coaches, this A3 Pacific heads south to York. Newcastle, summer 1965, and an unusually clean survivor, A3 Prince Palatine. Also from the castle ramparts, we can follow this Thomson L1 264 tank as it draws empty coaching stock into the station. A1 Bongrace heads over the complex junction bound for Gateshead Shed. All too soon, we bid a last sad farewell to Miles Beaver. In 1967, she was cannibalized to provide parts for use in the restoration of Sister A4, Sir Nigel Gresley. The release of this program coincided with the 50th birthday of the latter locomotive, running today with her original number 4498. Another anniversary recently celebrated was the opening of the world's first great trunk railway, the London and Birmingham. As chronicled in this publication, the route remains while the name itself faded, merging in time to form part of the giant London Midland and Scottish Railway. The years immediately following 1923, when the LMS was formed, saw problems caused by its sheer size and the enmity between previous rivals. There were those loyal to the North Western, while the hearts of others lay with the former Midland Railway. It is the latter whose main route we now turn to. To start our journey, we travel back from Newcastle to Leeds. The timing of the start of our trip south coincides with the last days of steam as Britannia Pacific William Shakespeare draws this special into Leeds Central. Comfortingly familiar, yet somehow alien here in BR livery, the now preserved Jubilee Colliper takes over the working. In pre-grouping days, many railways worked in and out of this enormous industrial centre. The Midland Railway main line, which we are to focus our attention on, was very much the alternative route to London. As 70004 drifts away to her place in the history books, we move to Derby, in every sense the hub of the Midland Railway. But far from its native territory is a merchant navy, also on rail tour duty. It is March 1964, and Royal Mail will soon set off, heading for the line to Bristol. Steam-hauled rail tours were very much a part of the scene in the 1960s. The provision of unusual motive power, such as this, could hardly fail to draw attention. The Bulleid Pacific finally sets off for the south to reveal the famous locomotive works in the background. Other interlopers were locomotives of LNER design, like this B1 here heading a holiday extra. We are reminded that this is a former LMS line by the shape in the foreground, and at Repton and Willington, a Stania 280. While his Black Fives often worked express passenger trains. But our theme is disturbed once again, as an A4 works a rail tour near Hatton. It would seem a diversion is called for, so we leave the main line to travel further south to Barnt Green. Here a local enters behind an Ivet 260. At nearby Bromsgrove, the Bristol line traverses the 1 in 37 gradient of the Lickey Incline. This favourite photographic spot at Pike's Pool reveals Birmingham-bound Standard Class 5 73028. The Midland's Big Bertha has long gone. The banker is 92079, by now permanently resident at Bromsgrove. Jubilee Seychelles is soon to be passed by a Black Five making light work of a 5-coach semi-fast. Banking is provided by a Western pannier. All are welcome on the former Midland Railway, it seems. We pause for a final view of the 9F. Now we must curtail our visit and return to Derby to continue our journey to London. The proximity of the engine shed and locomotive works created many impressive engine movements in the station area. While the WD-280 was designed by a Northwestern man, Robin Riddles, the diesel shunter can trace its lineage back to a Midland 1F, which was dieselised in 1932. Ahead lies a fast section of line to Leicester. In true Midland style, this Jubilee roars through Loughborough towards Derby. While a Hughes Crab heads south on the goods line. Heavy coal trains were a regular sight. Leicester, London Road Station. The Merchant Navy we saw earlier at Derby, Royal Mail, interrupts once again, making liberal use of her steam sanding gear as she leaves heading north. Almost brand new, and probably on test, this Peak Type 4 breaks for the station with a local from Derby. Blending with this Stanier crab is Peak D104. While very much a threat of things to come, in early green livery she appears somehow less ominous. Also shunting in the approaches to Leicester Midland Shed is this 4F060, while another London-bound coal train approaches behind the Stanier Class 8 280. Seemingly observing the comings and goings with us, the 4F waits patiently while this Ivet Class 2 tank runs round north of the station. Her next task is to work this local service for Stamford. Many local services radiated from Leicester London Road station. This Derby-designed standard Class 2 tank was fitted with equipment for working push-pull trains on local branches. A contrast was provided by the Midland Pullman, which called twice a day at Leicester. These units, subsequently to be found on the Western region, were in many ways the forerunner of today's HSTs. But that is all for the future. We move to the cutting south of London Road as Jubilee St Helena coasts through with a fitted freight. But the pace of life was far from gentle for steam crews in the 1960s. With headlights gleaming in the wintry conditions, a Black Five vigorously accelerates her train through Humberstone. While a 9F heads a very mixed freight on the up goods line. As a Class 8 hurries north. While we are in the Leicester area, one diversion is irresistible. Our reward, a scene of almost pure Midland Railway antiquity. This branch was part of the original Leicester and Swannington Railway, but by the early 1960s, it was remarkable that both the line and its motive power had survived. Our crossing scene was filmed near Desford during the summer of 1963, the last year of service for this Midland 2F from Colville Shed. Returning to the main line, we are in time to see a fitted freight crossing the Welland Valley on the imposing Haringworth Viaduct. A summer Saturday at Ketton and Collie Weston finds a return seaside special headed by this standard Caprotti 5. While a Black Five makes for the east coast. The line from Melton Mowbray to Peterborough retained much of its Midland Railway flavour until its closure. Our location is Ketton and Collie Weston Station. A two-coach push-pull train departs. Motive power provided by the Ivor 262 tank seen earlier at Leicester. At the time of filming, this was the last push-pull train in the British Isles. Wakeley and Barradon on the Market Harborough to Peterborough line saw processions of extras for the East Coast. All too soon, we must head south again, pausing where the line's main freight motive power Stania 280s abound. In this view of the motive power depot at Kettering. Finally, St Pancras, the end of the Midland Main Line, with its imposing Gothic hotel, opened in 1873. The station itself was opened in 1868 and was built on the site of a notorious London slum. It is particularly famed for its overall roof. We take a last look at the Midland Main Line with the somewhat unusual combination of a Fairbairn 264 tank and Britannias Black Five arriving with a special train from Stoke. In the years following grouping, the divisions between the former Midland Railway and the LNWR all but disappeared. The same could not be said for the men of another of the Midland's former deadly rivals. As is well chronicled in this publication, the old Great Central spirit lived on, even after February 1958, when the London Midland region of BR assumed control of it from the Eastern region. However, the rationalisation that took place after the LM took over led to the closure of the former GCR main line in 1966. In its final years, a major attraction of the former GCR main line was the rich variety of motive power to be seen. Richard Willis is above all a great central man, and his filming provides a very special record of that era. Not far away from St Pancras is our start point. This, the last terminus station to be built in London. By the early 1960s, it was obvious that the line was being deliberately run down. But spirited performances could still be expected from many crews with engines like this B1. Also at Charwelton, a Royal Scot. An emigrant Black Five rattles over its home metals on the famous Birdcage Bridge at Rugby. A unique site at Aylstone Fields, Leicester. This was the only occasion when Britannia Pacific worked over the former Great Central Main Line. After the takeover by the London Midland region, Black Five and Royal Scot 460s replaced the line's native locomotives. The Scots were in turn replaced by Britannias, allocated to Banbury Shed in 1965. Unusual classes began to appear on rail tours. The 1948 locomotive exchange trials on the line are recalled by a West Country Light Pacific. The former Great Western were represented in the exchange trials by Hall Class 460s. But on this occasion, it is the much-travelled Clun Castle that found her way onto the GC. Having worked in from the south, Clun is to hand over to Royal Scot number 46163, Civil Service Rifleman, for the onward journey. Rail tours such as this were run extensively in the early and mid-1960s, anticipating the demise of both the Great Central and indeed steam traction itself. Fond memories are provided by these tours, and relics of the era. We remain at Leicester Central, and can see that it was a large version of the company's standard island platform station. Its spacious air can be judged as we watch this Scot glide to a halt with an up express. Royal Scots Grey presents a far more typical picture than her sister seen earlier. By 1964, the once common LNER V2s were becoming rare. Close to Abbey Lane sidings, a Black Five displays the sort of rapid working for which GC engine men were noted. Annesley Shed had a large allocation of 9Fs, but it was rare to find them on passenger work. The 210's main duties were the Annesley Woodford cutters, probably the fastest loose-coupled freight service in the land. Just north of Abbey Lane, a Black Five takes advantage of the falling gradient as it speeds south to Leicester. At Belgrave and Birstall, a reboiler Jubilee bursts through the station. The signalman pulls off for the arrival of a local service. Activity continues with the passing of a B163 The next stopping train is worked by a less than steam tight Ivat 260, calling with an up local. Note the automatic single-line tablet catcher fitted to the tender. Next, our only double header in this GCR film record. 2 Class 5s worked 15 coaches northwards. LNER days are recalled with B1 number 61024. By this time, B1s were being rapidly displaced by Stanier Class 5s. BR Standard 5s were less common on the former GC. Rothley, February 1965. And by now, much of the line's traffic is in the hands of Black 5s. Loughborough, today the headquarters of the preserved Great Central Railway. It is rewarding to know that visitors to Loughborough can still experience the essence of this sequence. The Great Central crossed the Midland to the north of Loughborough. Back in the mists of time, express services could be seen at speed approaching the former. The once imposing facade of Nottingham, Victoria. Today, only the clock tower survives. The station was shared by Great Central and Great Northern trains, and remained impressive to the last. Just as the station is a thing of the past, Black 5 number 45385 met her end at Cashmore's in May 1967. In their thousands, the citizens of Nottingham made annual excursions to the east coast from these platforms. A typical working was this train, a B1 hauled special for Skegness. Even in the 60s, there was from time to time plenty of hustle and bustle at Nottingham. But sadly, those days were exceptional. More often than not, the platforms were virtually empty. So inevitably, the Great Central's days drew to a close. On the 3rd of September 1966, the last rites were to be performed. On that day, Elder Dempster Lines headed a Great Central farewell rail tour. Seen here, passing the brushworks at Loughborough. Back at Nottingham, this was the sad sight of the very last semi-fast leaving for Marylebone. Within months, the bulldozers were at work, as the station was demolished to make way for a shopping precinct. From the ashes of the Great Central, a notion arose that maybe something tangible could be saved. Richard Willis headed the original Main Line Preservation Group, whose aim was to preserve the section of line from Leicester to Nottingham. At the time, the project was greeted with disbelief, but it has flowered into the Great Central Railway, today one of this country's leading preserved railways. This undertaking looks set to achieve even greater things before the end of the 20th century. The desolation seen here at Belgrave and Birstall typifies the post-beaching era. Mercifully, this is one station that will reopen thanks to the efforts of preservationists. There was something very special about our railways in the early 1960s. The surroundings may not have been clean and tidy, but they had a certain aura, and steam abounded. Even in the late 1980s, much remains of the pre-nationalisation railways. But modernisation continues. Here at Reading, this new station complex, located on what was once the site of Reading's Southern Station, dominates the scene. A major improvement in standards of travel came about with the introduction of the HST, still a prominent feature on the former GWR main line today. Twyford, and speed on our journey eastward increases. One fears that this view will in turn take its place in the history books. The threat of electrification with its overhead wires and gantries is ever present. But for the time being at least, the scene is unspoiled, save for the addition of a castle or king perhaps. Modern signs abound. In particular, the new Network Southeast station nameboards stand out like a sore thumb. But here again, much remains of a bygone era. The flavour is still distinctly Great Western. The feature perhaps least likely to change is the track layout, a legacy of Brunel's 7-foot gauge. Again, the pace quickens as we move nearer to London. As our HST recedes into the distance, we are set to move back in time. The purpose of our journey to the capital is to start our second journey with Richard Willis, back to the railways of 25 years ago. The familiar frontage of the Great Western Royal Hotel has changed very little. More than can be said for the motor cars. Moving inside, a hiss draws our eyes to the first of many steam locomotives we are destined to see on this trip, Pannier 9415. Castles and kings always seemed to steal the limelight, but Paddington was host to many more humble engines. Halls were frequently employed on passenger trains, and 7920 has returned from servicing at Old Oak Common to take on a westbound express. By this time, modern taper boiler panniers were firmly in command of station pilot duties. Our attention is drawn back to platform 3 as Coney Hall is about to depart for the west. We leave these spotters on platform 8 and move to Didcot as Merchant Navy Orient Line drifts round the east curve with a Bournemouth Express. As well as bullied Pacifics, BR Class 5s worked in from the southern region over the section from Reading to here at Oxford. By 1964, Western Region engines were being deliberately run down. Cleaners were apparently non-existent, steam leaks went unchecked, and nameplates disappeared. Away from Paddington, the older 5700 panniers were still common, and we find 9789 in the former LMS goods yard, loose shunting a wagon. By contrast, main line goods workings were often handled by large prairies. "6106 is hustling this short transfer freight towards Hinksey Yard. The diversion of many expresses from other routes to the Oxford line saw an increase in the appearance of bullied Pacifics, such as Heartland. Diverted in September 1962 from the Somerset and Dorset line, one of these trains was the Pines Express. A mixed rake of green and maroon coaches headed by a large tendered Southern Region Class 5 waits for the road beneath a typical Western Region bracket signal. Signals such as this are now but a memory. as are the then ever-present telegraph wires. Oxford Shed and a visiting Stanier 8F, no doubt just arrived from Hinksey Yard, keeps company with a Hall, now sadly bereft of her nameplates. Our old friend Clun Castle, still in BR service, heads a special train between Oxford and Banbury. Large marshalling yards existed at Banbury to handle the considerable traffic that passed to and from the Great Central Line. The Great Central also provided most of the through trains to the southern region, all still then steam-hauled. The departure of a modified Hall, 6996, allows us a comparison with the original Collet variety. Impney Hall is about to hand over her train of LNER vans to a Thompson B1 for transfer onto the Great Central. This cross-country traffic brought many LNER engines to Banbury. These scenes bring back happy memories as we are allowed into the cab of 61109. Her left-hand drive position contrasts sharply with the right-hand one of native Great Western engines. With a smile from the driver, the B1 departs for Woodford Halls. Gossington Hall brakes smartly to a halt with another train for the Great Central Line. It was not uncommon for halls to work as far as Leicester with southern trains. South of Leamington we meet the Pines Express again, on this occasion headed by Cricketh Castle. By 1963 the castles were in serious decline. They had lost much passenger work to the wave of diesel hydraulics and were often relegated to relief working. This single-chimneyed example has found employment on a 13-coach special as it races downhill towards Leamington. We follow on to Leamington as a large prairie runs light engine through the station. Next along, and working flat out to rush Hatton Bank with a rail tour, is Walton Grange. Whilst numerically greater than the heavily preserved Manor class, not one Grange survived the slaughterous steam. Richard Willis captured the unique site of double-headed Granges when they arrived at Leamington to take over a rail tour. These well-respected engines were similar to the Halls but had smaller wheels, recovered from withdrawn Class 4300 moguls. Note the different types of tender as the two engines back into the upwards loop to await their train. Birmingham's much-loved Snow Hill station was a major casualty of the 1960s rationalisation programme. 20 years after its rundown, time has proved the folly of this blunder. It occupied a place in the hearts of Birmingham people. Sunny holidays started here. Friends and lovers met on its spacious platforms, and it was a wonderful place for train spotters. By now, Clun Castle had been preserved by Pat Whitehouse. In March 1967, together with Pendennis Castle, she performed Steam's last rites at Snow Hill. This event marked the end of through trains from London to Birkenhead, and we say farewell to the castles with the stirring sight of a single chimneyed example rushing the 1 in 100 Shifnal Bank. Wellington, a short way to the northwest, was the beginning of a network of GWR and LMS joint lines. It is here that we catch our first sight of the controversial Britannia class. Little loved by Western Region crews, these Pacifics performed creditably elsewhere. This engine, John of Gaunt, was initially allocated to the Eastern Region. Hereford was one of the joint line's major centres. The car park at Bars Court Station confirms our 25-year regression, and today these vehicles would be collector's items. By the time of our visit, Newport to Shrewsbury expresses were mostly in the hands of halls and castles. Social trends over the intervening years have made this fireman's cigarette much less acceptable. The Western's penultimate outpost at Chester, deep in London Midland Territory, is the setting for this unusual combination of double-headed pannier tanks. They are to hand over their rail tour to a rear interloper, Peppercorn Pacific Blue Peter, an engine by now in great demand for such workings. We say our farewell to the Western as Blue Peter sets off from the first of BR's regions to abolish steam. At Chester in pre-grouping days, the Great Western met its sometime ally, the London and North Western Railway. The theme of our next journey is very much in keeping with this book, published by Ian Allen Limited. Many years have elapsed since Stanier Pacifics pounded their way along the West Coast main line, but thankfully we can relive those days by way of photographs and film. One of the West Coast main line's principal branches was to Holyhead, long an important link with Ireland. The LNWR invested heavily here, not just with the railway station, but they also developed the inner harbour. This was uniquely situated between the up and down platforms and saw tremendous activity in the days before mass air travel. The railway's many ferries and packet steamers plied between Holyhead and Dunleary, transporting people, cattle for the mainland's abattoirs, and most importantly, mail, hence the name of the principal rail service. This sort of activity can still be seen at Holyhead nowadays. On Anglesey, we find the longest station name in the UK, understandably shortened to Llanfair PG by BR staff. Black 5 5307 makes its last stop on the island with a local from Holyhead. The ancient walls of Conway Castle seem to dwarf a Black 5, all 63 feet of it. But the walls do provide a magnificent vantage point to observe this classmate. The train almost fully comprised of Great Western coaches. A diversion to the Conway Valley branch in the 1950s provides an almost unique view of a Stanier Class 3 262 tank in action. While to the north, Llandudno Junction's other branch led to Llandudno itself. Here, a superb terminus, where thousands of holidays began. These recent arrivals will have enjoyed magnificent views of the North Wales coast, the final leg of their journey having commenced at Crewe behind 70051. As the Britannia backs out with her recently arrived train, our cameo is completed as 5380 heads east with homeward bound holidaymakers. Near Colwyn Bay, an 8F slogs uphill towards Penmaenros Tunnel with a heavy freight train. Our next location is the border city of Carlisle, northern limit of the London Midland region. The impressive station was built by a joint committee and served the LNWR together with the Caledonian, North Eastern and Midland Railway, amongst others, in pre-grouping days. Concentration of traffic to and from Scotland gave Carlisle a train service far in excess of its own requirements. At the time of our arrival, things seemed fairly quiet, with a BR standard tank simmering at the head of a local train. But the platforms are full as the crew of Jubilee Mars prepare for their assault on the Settle and Carlisle line to Leeds. While at the north end of the station, City of Salford begins its 112-mile journey to Glasgow. Typical of the era, 6257 was far from immaculate, while this fellow Pacific is even grimier. Following their concentration on the London Midland, Britannias became a common sight at Carlisle. Westmoreland, before the advent of the M6 motorway. This was the main road to Scotland. These were the days when Scottish rail traffic was laboriously hauled over one of Britain's most notorious inclines. Shap Summit lies to the south of the station, and that's the direction we head off in for some action. This Black Fives partially fitted freight is banked by one of T-Bay Shed's Class 4 tanks. The occupants of Scout Green signal box had become accomplished hosts to photographers by the 1960s. These spectacular views will indicate why. Northbound trains faced the hardest task, but were helped to gain speed by the stretch of line through the Lune Gorge between Low Gill and T-Bay. Close to Dillicar Troughs, a Black Five rushes towards T-Bay with a fitted freight. By 1965, much of the remaining steam-haul traffic was in the hands of Stanier Class 5s. A year earlier, Jubilees were still in evidence, albeit reduced to parcels and fitted freight workings. As were Royal Scots, but also demoted. After this final view, we have to leave the northern fells behind. From Lancaster, we reach Preston, the scene of frantic activity at holiday times, when normal West Coast traffic was swelled by hundreds of trains carrying holidaymakers to Blackpool. The arrival of Britannia Polar Star presents an opportunity to visually compare the simple Riddle's two-cylinder mixed traffic Pacific with Stanier's larger and more complex Ultimate Express design. The near-empty platforms testify to the everyday nature of the occasion. Only a young family bid farewell to the Lakes Express. No sooner has 70026 got underway than City of Leeds sets off in apparent pursuit. At Stockport, double-chimneyed Jubilee Bahamas sets off for Manchester. By 1964, many Jubilees had been withdrawn or were in store. Enthusiasts who wished to find them in happier circumstances began to descend on Leeds, with engines such as New South Wales still at work on services to Manchester. The heart of the LNWR, Crewe. Sir William Stanier's namesake glides powerfully away with the Down Express, whilst Argenti provides complete contrast with a short transfer freight. To the enthusiast, Crewe North Shed was almost impregnable. Many would-be visitors never got further than the footbridge entrance. However, we are to enjoy an uninterrupted tour of the shed. Starfind amongst an incomparable array of Pacifics. While 71,000 had a rather checkered service career, the visually similar but far less complex Britannias fared much better. It might seem just like yesterday, but scenes such as this will never be repeated. While designed at Derby, all 55 Britannias were built at Crewe, the last 10 with the larger BR-1E tender. The shed itself was for many years home to the largest allocation of engines on the LMS, and closed in 1965. Our final view at 5A is provided by City of Birmingham. Recently overhauled but soon to be withdrawn, she reverses away to Crewe Station to take over an express. Tamworth, 1963. Sir William Stanier races south under newly erected wires with a Glasgow to London special, to be followed by a BR Class 4 mogul working empty coaching stock. The Trent Valley Line provided a bypass which allowed many West Coast expresses to avoid the congestion of Birmingham, our next port of call. At New Street in 1964, Jubilees such as Jutland could still be seen heading service trains, while only 4 months from withdrawal, City of Nottingham leaves with a rail tour. Back on the Trent Valley at Nuneaton, a princess meets a Type 4. An Ivat Mogul drifts past on its way to the shed. Nuneaton provided a magnificent location for observing West Coast expresses at high speed. As well as Royal Scots, there were Britannias. But the stars of the show were still Stanya's Duchesses. The pace slows as 52.25 pauses with a semi-fast. Meanwhile, a 350 horsepower shunter pushes wagons over the hump in the up yard. The Black Fives' departure is our cue to move further south to Rugby, where a rust-coloured Jubilee awaits us. .5696's departure allows us a view of her Fowler tender. With safety valves feathering, City of Stoke-on-Trent coasts downhill towards Rugby at Hill Morton. Our last view of the West Coast main line without overhead wires, as a Britannia tears through the Northamptonshire countryside near Long Buckby. Steam's impending demise is forecast on the unusual three-track section near Shilton. With overhead wires firmly in place, a Jubilee on a fitted freight is overtaken by an express headed by a Type 4 diesel. Of Britain's pre-nationalisation companies, it was the Southern Railway that led the field in electrification. That is but one part of a fascinating story chronicled in this David and Charles publication, compiled by the highly successful partnership of David St. John Thomas and Patrick Whitehouse. Waterloo, major terminus for the Southern's third rail EMU commuter network, also the gateway for holiday journeys to the southwest. While the Southern might have popularized alternatives to steam, they seemed happy to stick with it if appropriate. As late as 1967, steam locomotives worked from here in daily service. For a privileged few, its bullied Pacific-hauled boat trains provided the starting point for the transatlantic liners, then still operating from Southampton docks. Unrebuilt West Country Seaton makes a relatively clean start with a down boat train. Next, an arrival with Merchant Navy Ellerman lines. This aspect of 35029 is no longer available to us. Meanwhile, wreathed in steam, unrebuilt Battle of Britain 249 Squadron departs. The lack of slipping might be due to assistance from the carriage pilot, a BR Class 3 tank. By 1963, Bullied Pacifics virtually monopolized steam traffic at the station. 213 Squadron was one of only 17 of the 44-strong Battle of Britain class to be rebuilt into this modified form. The squadron's Bournemouth Express is followed out by another rebuild, West Country Woolacoop. Shape and position of nameplates provides the easiest means of telling a rebuilt light Pacific from a merchant navy. This grimy example of the latter heads a train composed almost entirely of bullied coaches, whilst Pioneer West Country Exeter arrives to take up its next duty. Following the example of Elder Dempster Line's firemen, we wave farewell to Waterloo and follow on to Weybridge, where this BR Class 4 on goods duties precedes the spectacle of these expresses speeding south through London's suburbs. Winter sunlight silhouettes a West Country as it runs light engine through the woodlands near Woking, while further west at Purbright, a sister heads away from London. Shortly afterwards, another rebuilt light Pacific, Boscastle, rushes towards the capital with a short express. This stretch of the southwestern main line deserved its nickname, the Racetrack, with Elder Dempster Lines maintaining tradition as she charges through Fleet. The Southern's BR Class 5s also turned in spirited performances. Hook was another favourite location for recording the bullied Pacifics at high speed. Filmed in 1964, this location provides further original engines, but the rebuilds were ever present. Contrasting with clean coaches, a somewhat grimy unrebuilt Pacific Wilton calls at Basingstoke. This was the junction where trains for the north, such as the Pines Express, diverged from the Waterloo line. We pause as 73029 rushes towards London with an extremely mixed rake of coaches. The arrival of Tamar Valley with an up train precedes the approach of an unusual visitor. Once again, it is A2 Pacific, Blue Peter. It is August 1966, and Blue Peter is far from her former base on the Scottish region with a rail tour. West of Basingstoke, the Salisbury line diverged from the Southampton line under the flyover at Worthing Junction. Holland-Africa Lines works easily, heading a lightweight express. Closely followed on the up Southampton line by a more heavily laden 73065. A detour towards Salisbury finds Royal Mail charging eastward at Whitchurch. Moving on, we reach Tunnel Junction outside Salisbury, where we find another foreigner, A4 Kingfisher. Salisbury became the collecting point for withdrawn engines at the end of steam on the southern region. With only a month to go in BR service, Blackmore Vale draws a special train into this famous station. Eastleigh Shed in its last month of steam operation. Saunton stands outside the shed ready for her next turn of duty. Meanwhile, the crew of 76066 trim their coal. Just inside the shed, a West Country receives what will probably be the last repairs in its working life. Now the final leg of our journey to Bournemouth, as a BR Class 5 races through Hinton Admiral Station. Tamar Valley forges up the bank out of Christchurch towards Hinton Admiral with an express for Waterloo. While westbound, Lyme Regis takes advantage of the final fast stretch of line before Bournemouth. Shortly after, Westward Ho, following its own directions, drifts lazily downhill with a stopping train for Bournemouth. In complete contrast, Holland-Africa Lines will need some serious braking to comply with the permanent speed restriction at Christchurch. Those blue and grey coaches signal the final impending demise of steam. 2 months more and Holland-Africa Lines would be but a memory along with Bournemouth's busy steam shed. Today, the concept of this shed, with its attendant noise and pollution, existing in the centre of a thriving holiday resort, is impossible. While the schools, long associated with the line, had disappeared by the time of our visit, we close with a view of 30935 abandoned to its fate.
Thankfully, however, somehow, steam lives on.